Hey, you. Yeah, you. Come closer. Come closer. Don't be shy. A little closer. Okay, well, not that close. Sheesh, personal space much. Welcome to Chris's Story Emporium. Don't mind the clearly PNG background. I promise these books are as real as the girlfriend you'll definitely get one day. Don't believe me? Well, here, I'll prove it to you by reading you one of the stories you can find here. When we last left off, our intrepid young hero found himself awakening in a strange land surrounded by strange people. Probably not dissimilar to what gamers feel when they experience that odd thing known as outside or talking to women. Let's check back in to see how he's faring in this strange new place.
Chapter 8 Daya. Despite how exhausted his body was, CJ refused to rest. His mind was sharp after that interrogation, making it impossible to sleep even if he'd wanted to, which he most certainly did not. The softness of the bed beneath him made that decision a little more difficult, as did the warmth of the silk sheets. He never so much as looked at a bed this fancy before. But fortunately, his resolve was stronger than his exhaustion. Unfortunately, that resolve was not enough to get him out of bed. Even now, a couple hours after Barthazal and Trevor had left, he still didn't have the strength to get up. The hour before, Maroon came by with more tea and practically poured it down his throat herself. This one didn't make him sleepy, though. It was supposed to help fight the effects of the poison that apparently still lingered in his system. She had explained, albeit somewhat grumpily, that he'd been slashed by a hobgoblin's dagger. They were known to lace the blade with some kind of toxin that would paralyze the victim within minutes, if it didn't kill them first. That comment finally explained what Madame Cherish had said when she came to check his wound earlier. "It's a minor miracle you survived it all," she had muttered to herself while inspecting the slash. The skin surrounding it wasn't yellow like before, but it had become unnaturally pale. Apparently, he wasn't supposed to worry about that either. On their way out, both women had encouraged him to sleep, offering him that knockout tea. He had politely declined their offers. He'd spent the last hour of solitude just trying to come to grips with everything. Some part of him, maybe even a large part, wanted to believe all of this was fake. At least if it was a hallucination, there was an explanation. If it was a dream, he wasn't in some castle infirmary somewhere, surrounded by people with swords and impossible creatures and weird, glowing outlines. But, unless his episodes had gotten considerably worse in one day, this had to be real. But that idea came with so many more questions than answers. For starters, where was he? Being told he was in the infirmary of the Golden Castle was about as helpful as being told he was on Mars. He had no idea how close this castle was to home. No one would answer that question either. He'd asked a bunch of the nurses when he'd be able to go home. No matter who he asked, the answer had come back the same. It isn't up to us. And the other question on his mind was, who were these? The sound of a heavy door opening echoed throughout the room, tugging CJ from his thoughts. The world beyond his curtain had grown quiet after Maroon left. Apparently, it had been well after midnight even then. Was it morning already? Was that Barthazal coming to continue their conversation? But after the sound of the door, nothing else breached the stillness of the night. He'd expected footfalls or voices, something to indicate what was going on. Instead, quiet. Which was why he was so caught off guard when a hand slipped through the curtain and peeled it back. One of the nurses poked her head inside, face hidden in the shadow of her hood. The only thing CJ could see was a pair of piercing gray eyes scanning the room. As soon as their gaze met, the woman ducked under the curtain and into the space. "Good, you're awake," she said, tugging off the hood. Impossibly black hair fell past the girl's shoulders, and her thin lips curled into a warming smile. Her face had that same quality everyone around here seemed to share, making her age difficult to pinpoint. But she didn't look much older than he. Beneath the shawl, she wore a white shirt and matching pants, with slippers carrying on the trend. They looked almost like fancy pajamas. "Madame Cherish sent me to see how you're doing." But the girl had stopped just beyond the curtain, and made no move to come any closer. Instead, her thin frame stood straight and tall, feet planted together as if she were trying to take up as little space as possible. His gaze found her gray eyes, which were staring back at him intently. When a hazel glow began to emanate from her, he turned away and searched for something else in the room to study. Her feet made no noise as she crossed the small space, stopping just short of his bedside. "I'm Daya, by the way." She took another half step closer, though the motion seemed almost hesitant. As she held out a hand to shake his, CJ caught a glimpse of a mischievous smile flash across her lips. That was an expression he recognized because he wore it quite often. It was the face of someone who had just gotten away with something. CJ's eyes narrowed as he searched hers, and he no longer cared that he was staring. He ignored the hazel glow she began to exude, instead looking for more signs of mischief. "Madame Cherish didn't send you," he accused quietly. Dia opened her mouth, but then shut it again without uttering a word. Then she shrugged, the grin on her face widening. Guilty as charged. I'm also not a mender either. I just needed this to get past the guards, she said, tugging at the hem of the shawl. Guards? He stammered. Dia's eyes were still trained on him, and the way she smiled made her looks even harder to ignore. That's how I knew which wing you were in, Dia said casually, pulling the wooden chair closer to the bed and taking a seat. The door into this section had triple the number of guards it usually does. It was almost enough to scare me off, but I was willing to risk it to meet you. Triple the number of guards? Who do they think I am? That thought was even more captivating than the way Dia stared at him. It'd been so overwhelming that he hadn't processed the rest of what she'd said until a moment later. Wait, you snuck in here to meet me? She had to stifle the laugh that replied. What, you think I took a midnight stroll and ended up here by mistake? It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to meet an outcast, let alone someone who claims to be a Blake. That was odd. She emphasized his name as if it were significant, giving it the same weight as royalty or something. Come to think of it, Barthazal and Trevor had both reacted to his name as well. Question was, why? Is it true? Dia asked as she leaned forward in the chair, placing her head in her hands. Those gray eyes were scrutinizing him again, searching for something. But it was somehow different than when Barthazal had done so earlier. There was no judgment being made here, no weighing of worth. He met her gaze for only a moment before the hazel glow began again, and he opted to study the chandelier overhead. How'd you hear about me? He asked, not taking his eyes off the ceiling. Dia smirked, making her eyes light up even more. If there's one thing the healers are good at, it's fixing people. If there are two things, the second is gossip. The entire castle has been buzzing about the two kids from Outcast since breakfast yesterday. The fact that one of them says he's a Blake will be everywhere by morning. So, is it true? I mean, yeah, my last name is Blake, but I don't get what the big deal is, CJ muttered. He was getting tired of being berated by questions when no one bothered to answer any of his. And now here was this girl that just popped by in the middle of the night to continue the trend. Dia leaned back in the chair and fiddled the sleeve of what CJ could now definitely identify as a pajama top. That's an easy one. If you're really part of the Blake family, you're a part of a lineage of legends. The very first guardian, the person who started it all, was a Blake. CJ did his best not to stare at her, but he hung on every word she spoke. That explained the reactions he'd gotten from both Barthazal and Trevor. The elder had seemed completely surprised, and Trevor had taken a step back in awe at the idea. Obviously, there had to be some kind of mix-up, though. Just because he had the same name as these legends didn't mean it was the same family. But Blake wasn't the only word Dia said that people kept tossing around with significance. I hear Guardian said a lot, too, like it's supposed to mean something. That's what the misshifter called Trevor, too, CJ said quietly. But when he glanced back at Dia, her jaw had dropped halfway to the floor. Her eyes were wide open, staring at him in astonishment. You really encountered a misshifter? I would have sworn Roy was lying about that part. I've only been taught about them, never had to see one in person. Probably wouldn't have lived to tell about it if I did. But if you're a Blake, that explained why you were attacked, and why an elder sat next to your bedside for 2 days waiting for you to wake up. 2 days? CJ yelled. He tried to sit up, but a fresh flash of pain ran through his chest and he fell back down. Dia was up from the chair in an instant, finger to her lips as her other hand covered his mouth. Be quiet, will you? Do you have any idea how much trouble I'll be in for breaking curfew? She asked fiercely. But he barely heard her. Had he really been here for 2 days? His mom had to be worried sick. She probably had the police flipping Stafford upside down looking for him. And how was he going to explain where he'd been? If his hallucinations didn't get him tossed in the loony bin, claiming he was nearly killed by magical creatures and taken to some castle goodness knows where sure would. He was so engrossed in the thought that it took him a moment to realize that Dia was still standing at his bedside, staring down at him intently. Her hand was still over his mouth, which she only seemed to realize a moment later when she removed it. Sorry about that. I just don't want to get caught out of my dorm, she muttered, studying the ground to hide how red her face had become. If you might get in big trouble, why are you here? CJ asked, pretending not to notice. Dia dropped back down into the chair, trying to shrink away as she avoided his gaze and held her arms tight around herself. When you're out of here, she said, gesturing to the infirmary around them, everyone will want to meet you. I figured if I were going to have a chance to meet a real outcast, I'd have to do it when no one else would dare. Besides, now I can claim to be the first cadet to talk to a Blake. Outcast, CJ echoed. Everyone keeps calling me that, or they'll say I'm from Outcast. What's that about? It'd take a whole history lesson to tell you the entire story, she said, now inspecting her snowy slippers. But that's what we call your world. Outcast. My world? The thought spun around in CJ's head, but he couldn't seem to grasp it. And Daya had said it so casually, as if the notion were the most obvious thing in the world. If this was all real, though, it meant CJ wasn't just in some random castle somewhere. He was in some random castle in a different world entirely.
Well, well, well. It seems this strange castle is in another world. Now, if only there had been warning signs like, magical light sources or floating orbs or otherworldly creatures that could have clued him into this completely unforeseeable twist. Well, this is the part of it. This is the part of the video where I usually bid you farewell, especially to those internet sojourners who will wander out of my corner of the woods forever. But as you can see, behind me the facade of the bookstore has fallen away, replaced by the backdrop of a dungeon corridor. By the laws of the land, you are now trapped here. What a shame. I guess your only choice now is to wait here until next week when our story continues. Alternatively, I guess you could find a PNG of an escape tunnel and take your chances out there in the internet. Or maybe you could comment "help" down below and someone will hear your cries. Whatever you choose, I've been your host, John Dungeon, and this has been Chris Story Studios. See you all next week for Chapter 9. 'Cause you can't leave.